March 14th, 2025. A day many weather enthusiasts, meteorologists, and storm chasers will never forget. But it started out just like any other day. And in fact, most of the attention wasn't on the 14th. In fact, it was on the next day. For only the third time, the Storm Prediction Center issued a Day 2 high risk for portions of Alabama and Mississippi. The last time they issued a Day 2 high risk was for the April 14th, 2012 tornado outbreak. What models were showing was extremely concerning. Shear would be high, instability would be through the roof, and model runs showed multiple supercells forming in the area, all with the potential to produce strong to violent tornadoes. The 14th was also seen as a big severe weather day, but many were more concerned about what the 15th could bring to the Deep South. Little did chasers and weather enthusiasts know that the 14th, Pi Day, would end up being the biggest day of the outbreak. From March 13th through the 16th, 2025, a total of 118 tornadoes touched down across the United States, the majority of them on the 14th. Despite the heavy focus on what could have happened on March 15th, the tornado outbreak on the 14th ended up being historic in its own right. Supercells and tornadoes tore across Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Illinois, and Indiana, changing towns and lives forever. Today, I will be taking a deep dive into the March 14th, 2025 tornado outbreak, also known as the 2025 Pi Day outbreak. I'll be covering the synopsis, the events as they happened, the aftermath and recovery, and how the impacted areas are doing today. Welcome to Nature's Fury. Before we get started, I want to give a special thanks to Convective Chronicles for his video detailing the synopsis for this event. His video was used as a resource for this retrospective, and I highly recommend you check it out. This video will not cover the events of March 15th, 2025, but for those curious, I will cover it in a separate video down the line. In the upper levels of the atmosphere, a strong, powerful trough ejected to the northeast from the southwestern United States, bringing ample southwesterly flow to portions of the Mississippi River Valley. Closer to the surface, a broad area of low pressure underwent cyclogenesis, and rapidly deepened as a result. The developing surface cyclone brought in strong southerly flow up through the mid-Mississippi Valley, transporting warm and moist air from the Gulf northward. The expectations for the event went as follows. As the trough ejected to the northeast, a very strong jet max was expected to translate with it. The associated mid-level height falls would overspread portions of the central US as the cyclone developed over portions of the central high plains into the upper Midwest. Ample diurnal heating was expected throughout the afternoon ahead of the cyclone. The main concerns going into the event was the threat of straight-line winds of 80 to 100 miles per hour further north in parts of Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois. Areas further south in portions of southern Missouri and northern Arkansas was the threat of tornadoes. More discrete severe thunderstorms would develop over the afternoon on the northern periphery of somewhat better low-level moisture from southeast Missouri southward into the mid-south. Stronger high-level flow and ample deep layer shear over the region would promote a storm mode made of semi-discrete or fully discrete supercells capable of producing large hail and strong tornadoes. Areas further south would be farther away from stronger forcing, but the threat of a supercell or two forming and producing large hail and tornadoes was not out of the question. So what did our parameters look like? Starting off, let's look at the 500 millibar map. A very strong belt of flow was observed with it going into Oklahoma, reaching over 100 knots. For our area of focus though, that being south-central Missouri down south into northern Arkansas, there was still strong southwesterly flow of about 70 to 80 knots. As Trey pointed out in his video, the jet translation speed, basically how fast the jet max itself is moving, was high at nearly 54 knots. According to the Omega Project, the fast trough ejection speed was supportive of a tornado outbreak. At the 850 millibar level, the low-level jet was strong as well, bringing 40 to 50 knots of southerly flow into northern Arkansas and southern Missouri, but strengthening overnight to bring 60 to 70 knots of southerly flow into northeast Arkansas, southeastern Missouri, western Tennessee, southwestern Kentucky, and southern Illinois. Effective bulk shear ranged from 60 to 70 knots, and storm relative helicity values ranged from 200 to 400 meters squared per second squared early on in the event, but soon strengthened to anywhere from 400 to 600 meters squared per second squared in portions of northeastern Arkansas and southeastern Missouri. Instability was also adequate for the potential of strong tornadoes. There was a cap early on in the day, but by the time it eroded, mixed layer CAPE ranged from 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram, and 3-kilometer CAPE ranged from 75 to 125 joules per kilogram depending on where you were. The bulk of this CAPE was in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. Mid-level lapse rates do not appear to be very high. However, as we will see in a moment, there is a discrepancy between the SPC Mesoanalysis Archive and the observed soundings that must be addressed. Speaking of observed soundings, the main one I want to focus on is the one at Little Rock. Looking at the sounding, there's an obvious warm nose at the 750 millibar level, and an elongated hodograph with a classic sickle shape. As the night went on, the warm nose eroded, and moisture deepened as well. The sounding showed strong instability with nearly 2,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE. The hodograph was elongated, and the shear profile was indicative for the potential of supercell thunderstorms with the possibility of producing strong tornadoes. Temperatures were in the 70s and low 80s, and dew points, which were low early on, did moisten up to the 50s and low 60s. Given it was March, that was plenty enough for storms to thrive in this environment. The threat of severe weather that day was noticed early on by the Storm Prediction Center. The threat was first noted on the Day 6 Outlook issued on March 9th, a 15% risk containing a region from eastern Texas and parts of the lower and mid-Mississippi Valley up to southeastern Iowa. At the Day 5 Outlook, a 30% risk of severe weather was outlined for portions of Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Illinois, with the expectation that better moisture would overlap intense wind shear. For the Day 4 Outlook, the 30% contour was extended north alongside the 15% contour. At the Day 3 Outlook, an enhanced risk was issued containing areas from north-central Mississippi, eastern Arkansas, and northwestern Alabama, northward into far southeastern Iowa and north-central Illinois. The Storm Prediction Center issued a moderate risk at the first Day 2 Outlook, with a 10% SIG-TOR contour extending from central Mississippi up through portions of Iowa and north-central Illinois. A 45% significant wind contour centered on the mid-Mississippi Valley, and a 30% significant hail contour centered on that location as well. The next Day 2 Outlook was mostly the same. At 12:38 a.m. Central Daylight Time on March 14th, the Storm Prediction Center issued a Day 1 moderate risk, expanding the 45% significant wind risk and introducing a 15% significant tornado risk for portions of Missouri, Illinois, and Kentucky. At the next Day 1 Outlook, the 15% significant tornado contour was extended southeastward into portions of Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. The next big extension came at the 20Z Outlook, where the 15% significant tornado contour was extended southward into portions of central Mississippi and northeastern Louisiana. The risk was expanded once again for the threat of tornadoes at the 1Z Outlook. Regardless of the forecast, nobody had envisioned what the environment for this outbreak would be capable of producing. Throughout the morning and afternoon hours on the 14th, two things happened. The atmosphere began to warm up, but it also ended up drying it for a time, thanks in part to a process called vertical mixing. This wouldn't be an issue come nightfall once the low-level jet kicked in and brought in some more moisture from the Gulf. In the morning hours, a line of storms formed in Kansas and Oklahoma, moving to the east. These were ahead of the cold front, and they were below severe limits. Come around 1:45 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the first round of storms fired along the cold front in Kansas and Oklahoma, moving to the northeast. The threat posed at first was the threat of strong winds, and soon a severe thunderstorm watch was issued for portions of Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. Those thunderstorms quickly got warned for high winds. At 4 p.m., a new tornado watch was issued for portions of Missouri and northern Arkansas as the storms on the southern end of the cold front continued to develop. At around 6 p.m., the southernmost storms started to become more discrete, and they were an environment capable of producing significant tornadoes. It's important now for our discussion to differentiate between these two groups of supercells, which we will call Group A and Group B. Group A consists of the semi-discrete supercells that formed in southern Missouri, and Group B consists of the supercells that formed in Arkansas. The main focus of this video will be on Group B, but I want to give a brief overview of the supercells in southern Missouri that moved into the St. Louis metro and into Illinois. Of the supercells in Group A, there were 4 that were of major concern, but there was one that ended up producing the most tornadoes out of the cells in the area. The first of which being an EF1 tornado that touched down to the northeast of Diggins at 6:40, and traveled to the northeast, mainly over rural areas before lifting at 7:02 p.m. It produced yet another tornado shortly after in southeastern Laclede County, an EF1 that stayed over rural areas before lifting to the west of Edgar Springs. It soon produced 2 additional tornadoes, an EF1 and an EF2. The supercells then encroached on the St. Louis metro at 9 p.m. There's one tornado in this group I would like to delve into more deeply. The supercell responsible for 4 tornadoes cycled and produced yet another tornado at 8:52 p.m. on the east side of Villa Ridge, producing EF0 to EF1 damage as it moved over the area. The tornado quickly intensified as it moved into a neighborhood near the intersection of US Highway 100 and I-44, damaging numerous homes as the twister packed estimated winds of 130 miles per hour. One of the storm chasers on this storm, Ryan Scholl, witnessed it firsthand. As you can see from the video, there were numerous power flashes as it was in the general area near US Highway 100 and I-44. After crossing US Highway 100, the twister produced EF0 to EF1 damage to numerous buildings off of I-44, and reached homes in a neighborhood off of Foursquare Drive, producing EF2 damage there as well. The twister continued to the northeast, producing EF2 damage to a building off of Horse Drive before mostly producing EF0 to EF1 damage for quite a time again, until it passed near Forge Bridge Lane and Little Tavern Road, taking down a microwave transmission tower. The tornado crossed over into St. Louis County and continued to produce mostly minor damage until it lifted near Highway 100 at roughly 9:10 p.m. The Villa Ridge EF2 tornado was on the ground for 18 minutes, traveling a total of 17.76 miles with a peak width of 644 yards and estimated peak winds of 130 miles per hour. The tornado injured 1 and killed none. There were other significant tornadoes in the line that I want to briefly mention. Shortly after the Villa Ridge tornado lifted, the supercell produced an EF2 twister that moved through portions of the northern St. Louis suburbs, hitting Chesterfield, Maryland Heights, Bridgeton, and Florissant. Immediately after the Chesterfield tornado lifted, the supercell cycled and produced another tornado that moved through Old Jamestown into parts of Alton, Illinois. And a supercell to the south in the line would produce a long-track EF2 twister that moved through the southern suburbs of the St. Louis metro. The cells on this line would continue to produce tornadoes as they moved into Illinois and Indiana. However, the main focus was in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. The supercells I labeled earlier as being in Group B. At around 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time, a group of cells fired in western Arkansas and soon developed into supercells come 8 p.m. And with time, the cluttered nature of the storms went away as the shear increased. In total, there were 5 supercells that produced intense to violent tornadoes in that group, all of them producing tornadoes near concurrently. And the first one to produce a tornado would be the northernmost cell, and it marked the beginning of a tornado nightmare in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. I will be covering the tornadoes chronologically based on what supercell produced the tornado, and I will cover the cells from north to south. The first supercell, the Bakersfield, Thomasville, Des Arcs supercell, would produce 3 EF3 tornadoes, alongside an EF2 twister in Perryville. At 8:34 p.m. Central Daylight Time, a tornado touched down to the north of Gamaliel, snapping and uprooting dozens of trees as it crossed into Missouri, and made its way south of downtown Bakersfield at 8:40 p.m. Damage quickly intensified as it approached State Highway AR, with tree damage becoming more intense before it struck homes at roughly EF3 intensity, then reaching its peak intensity as it crossed County Road 589, obliterating a home and destroying the outbuilding next to it. As it approached State Highway 142, it rolled mobile homes off of the highway, and destroyed another home on the highway as it crossed over it at 8:43 p.m. The damage leveled off due to mostly rural terrain before it intensified again as it crossed near Wildcat Hollow, tossing mobile homes and ripping roofs off of homes at around 8:51 p.m. The twister then struck an old milk barn shortly thereafter at 8:52 p.m., with damage becoming minimal once again due to more rural terrain, up until it hit a building off of County Road 8800, passing through the area at around 9:04 p.m. It moved through Frankville at around 9:08, and continued to the northeast, lifting as it moved over US Highway 160 at 9:16 p.m., uprooting some trees. The Bakersfield, Missouri EF3 tornado was on the ground for 42 minutes, traveling a total of 35.74 miles with a peak width of 1,200 yards, and estimated peak winds of 145 miles per hour, injuring 4 and killing 3. As the Bakersfield tornado was weakening, the supercell cycled and produced a tornado just to the north of Brandsville at 9:11 p.m., traveling to the northeast and producing damage to mostly trees. The first instance of significant damage was noted off of County Road 331, where the tornado was estimated to have winds of 132 miles per hour as it tore the outside walls of a home off and tore down a power pole. Damage was limited for a while after that due to the lack of structures, but as it moved into Carter County, the tornado rapidly strengthened, reaching EF3 intensity with winds of 160 miles per hour as it debarked and snapped trees, and broke power poles. The twister hit homes to the southwest of Fremont at EF3 intensity, before it moved to the northeast, with the core of the tornado passing to the west of Fremont. At 9:57 p.m., it reached its peak intensity as it struck a home off of Oak Street. From this point onward, the tornado would remain at EF1 intensity due to the lack of structures, moving to the northeast with damage relegated to trees as it moved into Reynolds County, and lifting after crossing County Road 500 at 10:29 p.m. The Fremont EF3 tornado was on the ground for an hour and 18 minutes, traveling 58.24 miles with a peak width of 800 yards and estimated peak winds of 165 miles per hour. No fatalities or injuries were reported with this tornado. The supercell cycled once more and produced yet another tornado at 10:12 p.m., just to the northeast of Keeley's Corner. Damage was relegated to trees up until it crossed over Clearwater Lake at 10:24. The twister strengthened and struck trees and lakefront buildings with winds of 120 miles per hour. The damage remained relegated to trees as it moved into Wayne County, and it reached its peak intensity as it moved over the intersection of Highway CC and County Road 347, to the west of Gads Hill at 10:38 p.m., destroying homes with winds of 155 miles per hour. The twister's intensity leveled off for a while, mainly because of the lack of structures before it crossed over into Iron County. The tornado aimed straight for the town of Des Arc, and showed no mercy as it hit the town at 10:43 p.m., producing EF2 to EF3 damage throughout the town, with winds of 142 to 150 miles per hour. The damage leveled off for a while, with the last instance of EF2 damage being when it crossed over Leo King Road at 10:47. The twister then traveled into rural Madison County, only producing EF1 damage as it traveled to the northeast, soon lifting after crossing over Trace Creek at 11:01 p.m. The Des Arc EF3 tornado was on the ground for 49 minutes, traveling roughly 38 miles with a peak width of 1,525 yards, and estimated peak winds of 155 miles per hour. The tornado injured 4 and killed 3. As the Fremont tornado was on the ground, the supercell to the south of it had become separate enough to begin producing tornadoes itself, and it would produce 3 EF3 tornadoes. At 9:36 p.m., a twister touched down north of Koshkonong, traveling to the northeast, producing EF0 to EF1 damage for the time being. The tornado intensified as it moved over State Highway P at 9:47 p.m., removing large sections of a roof off of a home as it continued on its path. The tornado then reached its peak intensity shortly after crossing over US Highway 160 at 9:56 p.m., destroying most of a home off of County Road 402. The twister's damage tapered off quickly as it moved on an east-northeasterly path, lifting near a creek next to the 11-Point River. The Alton EF3 was on the ground for 30 minutes, traveling a total of 23.54 miles with a peak width of 800 yards and estimated peak winds of 145 miles per hour. No deaths or injuries were attributed to this tornado. The supercell cycled and produced its second tornado at 10:28 p.m., touching down to the northeast of Eastwood, producing damage to trees as it moved to the northeast, crossing over US Highway 60 at 10:38 p.m., striking homes to the northeast of there at 10:40. Damage reports remained minimal as it passed by Jackson at 10:43 p.m. and moved into Wayne County at around 10:48 p.m. It was here when the tornado began to intensify as it aimed its sights at the town of Leeper, Missouri. Crossing over State Highway 34, the tornado intensified to EF2 strength, snapping the trunks off of trees. It then aimed for homes off of County Road 459, destroying them at its peak intensity with winds of 165 miles per hour, slapping one house, destroying another, and debarking trees. It crossed over the Black River, still producing EF2 damage to structures and trees off of County Road 459 before it moved to the east-northeast. Damage became limited to trees once again, and soon the tornado would lift after crossing County Road 361 at 10:57 p.m. The Leeper EF3 tornado was on the ground for an hour and 18 minutes, traveling 58.24 miles with a peak width of 800 yards, and estimated peak winds of 165 miles per hour. The tornado killed 2 and caused no injuries. The supercell cycled once again and dropped yet another twister at 11:15 p.m. to the northeast of Greenville, traveling to the northeast and producing minor damage up until it crossed over State Highway 34 at 11:19 p.m., producing EF2 damage to trees and homes as it crossed over into Bollinger County, crossing over County Road 826 at 11:26 p.m., then County Road 822 at 11:27, all at EF2 intensity. The twister reached its peak intensity as it crossed over State Highway DD at 11:32, tearing down a home to their interior walls with estimated winds of 140 miles per hour, then striking another home nearby off of County Road 830. The tornado's strength seemed to taper off as it moved to the northeast, traveling to the southeast of Bestville before making a sharper curve to the north and moving to the southeast of Hurricane. The twister lifted at 11:40 p.m. after crossing State Highway M. The Club Hurricane EF3 tornado was on the ground for 35 minutes, traveling 28.75 miles with a peak width of 500 yards, and estimated peak winds of 140 miles per hour. The tornado killed 1 and caused 1 injury. While all this was ongoing, 4 supercells were getting their acts together in Arkansas. The northernmost in this group of 4 would produce 2 noteworthy tornadoes: the longest track tornado of the Outbreak, and an EF3 that went through Poplar Bluff. At 9:11 p.m., a twister touched down to the northeast of Elko, Arkansas, producing minor damage as it traveled to the northeast in the rural areas of northern Arkansas. That was until it crossed over State Highway 14 and struck the core of the town of 56 at 9:18 p.m., widening and producing EF3 damage in town with winds of 140 miles per hour. The tornado's significant nature continued as it traveled to the northeast, causing EF2 damage to trees as it expanded to be over half a mile wide. The twister soon passed south of Boswell and continued to produce significant damage as it moved into Izard County at about 9:29 p.m. Damage in the county continued as it moved to the northeast, but mostly relegated to trees and utility poles. That was until it passed by Larkin at 9:44 p.m., rapidly intensifying to EF4 intensity as it struck and destroyed a home off of County Road 102, and then doing the same to another home at 9:46 p.m. off of County Road 103. The damage became more minimal for a time thanks to the rural terrain, but that quickly changed as it moved near the intersection of EZK Road and County Road 57, completely destroying an auto repair shop and a home nearby with winds of 170 miles per hour. Damage leveled off for a while once more before it moved into Sharp County at EF2 intensity. The twister crossed over US Highway 167 at 10:02 p.m., producing EF2 damage to the area to homes and trees. Damage was less noticeable for a time once more, producing a small area of EF2 damage off of Bring Spring Branch as it continued to the northeast. The twister crossed over US Highway 62 at 10:22 p.m., producing EF2 damage to a house next to the highway. The twister crossed into Randolph County and just barely missed coring the town of Raventon Springs at 10:27 p.m. It kept its northeasterly motion as it remained over rural terrain, but quickly the tornado strengthened as it got near the town of Hamil at 10:41 p.m., producing EF3 damage to homes off of State Highway 231. The twister remained between EF1 and EF2 intensity as it traveled throughout the rest of Randolph County and into Missouri at 10:56. From this point onward, the tornado's track became more erratic, switching from moving between in a north-northeasterly direction and an east-northeasterly direction. As the tornado approached US Highway 160, it shifted to moving in an easterly direction as it crossed into Butler County, taking a sharp curve to the north and producing EF2 damage to structures and trees along County Road 488, Mahogany Lane, and Highway F before lifting to the south of Lone Hill at 11:24 p.m. The 56 Arkansas EF4 tornado was on the ground for 2 hours and 13 minutes, traveling nearly 119 miles with a peak width of 1,400 yards, and estimated peak winds of 170 miles per hour. The tornado injured 5 and killed none. Shortly after the 56 tornado lifted, the supercell cycled and produced another tornado to the south of Stringtown at 11:27, moving to the northeast and aiming straight for portions of Poplar Bluff. The tornado quickly intensified as it approached the area, producing EF3 damage to homes off of County Road 450 at 11:29, and to other buildings off of County Road 450 as it moved closer to Poplar Bluff. The twister moved over US Highway 67 around 11:31 p.m., and continued to produce EF2 damage as it moved through the northern side of the city. The damage lessened in intensity as it crossed over US Highway 60 at 11:39, and remained that way until it passed over County Road 548, where it began producing EF2 damage again. Shortly after, the tornado quickly weakened and lifted after crossing County Road 572 at 11:47 p.m. The Poplar Bluff, Missouri EF3 tornado was on the ground for 20 minutes, traveling about 18.5 miles with a peak width of 350 yards, and estimated peak winds of 145 miles per hour. The tornado injured 3 and killed 1. As the 56 Arkansas EF4 was on the ground, the cell just to the south of it soon began to produce tornadoes too. Another long-track tornado through northeastern Arkansas. At 10:16 p.m., a twister touched down to the southwest of Cushman, Arkansas, moving to the east-northeast. Almost immediately, the twister's intense nature became apparent as it moved along Claxton Loop, producing EF2 to EF3 damage to trees, houses, and mobile homes as it moved through. The worst being done to a mobile home that was completely rolled off of its foundation. As it traversed through the rest of Independence County, damage was limited due to rural terrain. That was until it crossed over into Sharp County at around 10:35, and struck Cave City, Arkansas, first striking homes off of West Center Street, and then crossing over US Highway 167, and damaging homes and structures off of Dawn Street and North Street. At 10:39, the twister reached its peak intensity as it struck homes off of Northwoods Lane, destroying a nearly finished house with winds of 165 miles per hour. The twister remained over the countryside for a while, with the next instance of significant winds being when it crossed over West Prosperity Road at around 10:42, destroying mobile homes and outbuildings while it traversed to the northeast. At around 10:49 p.m., the twister struck the community of Calamine, destroying a mobile home and severely damaging a metal building system. The tornado crossed over into Lawrence County at around 10:50, striking mobile homes and trees while crossing over County Road 273. The tornado did not reach an intensity higher than EF1 moving through the county, crossing over US Highway 63 at 11:06 p.m., barely missing the small community of Black Rock as it made its way fully into Randolph County at 11:15, after going in between the two for a while due to border shenanigans. The twister crossed over US Highway 67 South at 11:20 p.m., hitting the community of Shannon in the process, where roofs were damaged, but overall damage to homes was limited. The twister remained weak for a period of time up until it made its way onto US Highway 62, intensifying to EF2 strength while snapping power poles. The twister struck the community of Reno, producing EF1 damage before crossing into Clay County at around 11:38. While crossing over County Road 112, the twister produced its last area of EF2 damage to power poles and grain bins. The tornado continued on a northeasterly path, crossing over US Highway 67 again at 11:45, and slowly began to shrink in size and weaken before lifting after crossing County Road 147 at 11:51 p.m. The Cave City, Arkansas EF3 tornado was on the ground for an hour and 35 minutes, traveling about 82 miles with a peak width of 700 yards and estimated peak winds of 165 miles per hour. The tornado injured at least 5 and killed 3. While the Cave City EF3 was on the ground over mostly rural terrain, the southernmost cell in Group B that I outlined earlier soon began to produce tornadoes, and it would end up producing the most violent tornado of the outbreak. At 11:13 p.m., a supercell thunderstorm produced a tornado near DeParty, Arkansas, and quickly began to produce EF1 to EF2 damage in areas nearby, such as on Buzzard Roost Road. The twister then crossed into Jackson County shortly after touching down, and very quickly became violent as it crossed over State Highway 14, producing EF3 to EF4 damage to several buildings in a neighborhood to the east of Max. The twister continued to move to the northeast, producing EF3 damage off of County Road 14 and on the White River as it moved through parts of Jackson Port at 11:23 p.m., while producing EF1 to EF2 damage in the town. It was around this time when Jai Collins and Cole Outlaw caught sight of the tornado themselves and took these photos. They were on AR-17 to the southeast of Newport. You can clearly see the twister illuminated in the darkness as it moved over land. As it approached Fitzgerald, the twister rapidly intensified, reaching its peak strength as it struck buildings and a large home off of West Main Street at 11:26 p.m., with peak estimated winds of 190 miles per hour. The twister weakened a bit, but was still causing significant damage as it continued through Campbell Station at 11:29. The twister continued to the northeast, snapping some trees off of County Road 43, before weakening and soon lifting after crossing over Village Creek at 11:36. The Diaz, Arkansas EF4 tornado was on the ground for 23 minutes, traveling roughly 18.5 miles with a peak width of 1,760 yards. An estimated peak winds of 190 miles per hour. The tornado injured 2 and did not kill anyone. While this was ongoing, there was also that conditional risk for tornadoes that was in place for portions of the Mississippi Delta. Many cells tried to form and develop, but the cap and lack of forcing was too much for them. All except for one. A cyclic supercell that produced a few tornadoes, impacting portions of Greenwood, Elliott, and Vardaman. The cells that were in both groups A and B still produced tornadoes going into the 15th in portions of Illinois and Indiana, including an EF2 near Neoga, Illinois, an EF2 that struck Hammond, Illinois, and an EF2 that struck Oakland City, Indiana. Supercells were still present in other parts of Arkansas, mainly in the southwestern part of the state. A few tornadoes touched down there as well, including an EF2 south of Bluff City and an EF2 to the east of Arkadelphia. In total, 53 tornadoes touched down on the 14th. 5 EF0s, 19 EF1s, 19 EF2s, 8 EF3s, and 2 EF4s. The supercells that produced tornadoes were also producers of large hail, with 328 preliminary hail reports reported to the SPC, with 18 of those being reports for large hail. Those not impacted by the tornadic supercells dealt with a strong QLCS, in which there were plenty of wind reports. 575 preliminary wind reports, with 14 of them being strong wind reports. The strongest wind gust reported was 81 miles per hour near Blandisville, Illinois, and the largest hail reported was 2 inches in diameter in multiple locations. For those outside of the severe risk altogether was the fire weather risk. As the low-level cyclone bombed out, the resulting tight pressure gradient resulted in winds of 30 to 40 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding 50 to 70 miles per hour. Fires were reported in 9 counties across the state of Oklahoma, including Oklahoma County. In total, 142 injuries and 4 fatalities were credited to the wildfires. The dust that the storm system picked up was also a concern. The resulting dust storms resulted in multiple car crashes, most notably a multi-vehicle crash on I-70 which involved at least 71 vehicles. To say that the system was widespread in terms of its impacts is an understatement. The following day was the main focus for meteorologists and storm chasers alike. But as the twisters roared on in Mississippi and Alabama, people were just picking up the pieces in the hardest hit areas in Missouri and Arkansas. Damages from the twisters began with the tornadoes associated with the first line of storms that tore through southern and central Missouri, into portions of Illinois and Indiana. Beginning with an EF1 twister in rural Webster and Wright counties, damage was limited to barns and outbuildings, alongside a cell phone tower that had collapsed. The next tornado, an EF1 to the north of Lynchburg, had produced widespread tree damage and minor damage to homes and structures. Damage from the Vita EF1 was limited to trees, but it was near Rollo when damage became more severe. 2 homes off of East State Route 72 had their roof ripped off. Near the intersection of US Highway 100 and I-44 was where the worst of the damage from the Villa Ridge EF2 was. The upper stories of homes along Baker Street were gone. The worst hit home on the street had multiple walls missing from the structure. Then, near the end of its path, laid a microwave tower that had collapsed onto the ground. Most of the damage in Chesterfield was minimal. Some shingles missing, some tree limbs snapped. The same went for structures in Maryland Heights. It wasn't until it reached Bridgeton off of Scotch Drive where the tornado's intensity increased, with parts of people's roofs missing, with one house in particular missing some exterior walls. Damage in West Alton from an EF2 left one home with missing walls and a missing roof, and metal truss towers off of State Highway 94 had collapsed. Damages from the Arnold EF2 were mostly minimal, except for an instance of EF2 damage to a home off of Shelley Lynn Drive. The cells responsible for the tornadoes in central and eastern Missouri went on to produce tornadoes in Illinois and Indiana. A tornado that hit near Trenton, Illinois, ripped off most of a roof to a home off of Clinton County Line Road. Homes from a tornado near Etna, Illinois were in rough shape, and power poles were snapped. Further north in Hammond, Illinois, an EF2 twister completely destroyed an outbuilding just outside of town. But all the attention was on the tornadoes produced by the 5 or so supercells in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. The northernmost supercell of the group began its reign of terror in northern Arkansas, where satellite imagery showed mass swaths of trees that were uprooted. Then it reached Bakersfield. One of the first structures it hit was off of State Highway AR. With the exception of a few small interior rooms, the building was completely destroyed. The corridor of most intense damage began with a home off of County Road 589. Multiple walls had collapsed with some interior rooms remaining. A mobile home off of State Route 142 was rolled off of its foundation. The house nearby was swept down to its foundation. The damage for a while was relegated to tree damage seen through satellite imagery, up until the twister crossed over County Road 7390. Several residences had large sections of their roofs removed, with some evidence of a collapsed wall or two. Nearby tree damage had trunks snapped halfway up the tree, but some outbuildings near the residences were still standing. Just to the south was what was left of a mobile home that was obliterated, with the homeowner's belongings littering the field. Damage from the Fremont EF3 started similarly, limited to trees up until it crossed over State Highway M. Trees across the southern parts of Rover and along the state highway were uprooted, and a mobile home on the highway had been slid off of its foundation, with the trees being in a cyclonic pattern. The first area of significant damage came off of County Road 331. Power poles were snapped, and the exterior walls on the homes to the north were ripped off. Off of US Highway 160, entire groves of trees were uprooted, including some that were snapped. But it wasn't until it reached near Fremont before the damage became more intense. Starting with some snapped wooden poles off of Green Mountain Road, the tree damage along the road was excessive too. In the damage assessment toolkit, the meteorologist who wrote up one of the damage indicator summaries stated, "Absolutely extensive damage of either uploaded or snapped trees along this section of Green Mountain Road. Very reminiscent of what I saw on December 10th, 2021 in the LBL. At least 1 or 2 deep arc trees in this location." Off of Green Mountain Road to the northeast laid what was left of a family home. With the exception of what was likely the family kitchen, the entire house was gone. Off of Hay Hollow Road laid a home with its exterior walls collapsed and the roof on the ground. Significant damage to trees continued along Carter Route Y, and off of Oak Street was a home that had all of its walls collapsed. The house turned into shreds of wood and debris, with personal belongings likely underneath the rubble. The remaining damage from the Fremont EF3 was relegated to minor house damage and trees that were uprooted. Damage from the Dizark EF3 started off with snapped trees over rural areas in Reynolds County, Missouri. It wasn't until you reached the shore of Clearwater Lake where the true strength of the tornado started to become more clear. Numerous trees were snapped, and buildings on the lake were severely damaged or destroyed. Severe tree damage continued as you went further to the northeast. The damage was at its worst to the west of Gads Hill. 2 homes off of Highway CC were completely destroyed, although one had questionable anchoring. Mobile homes nearby were overturned and obliterated, and trees were snapped and uprooted. In Dizark, multiple buildings suffered extensive damage, the worst of it being a home off of 2nd Street, which was completely destroyed. Another house off of State Highway 143, which was newly built, was also leveled. The home had no anchor bolts. The last area of major structural damage was on Highway F, a home missing some of its walls. Damage from the Alton EF3 was mostly relegated to trees up until it reached State Highway P, where a home's roof and upper story were heavily damaged. Off of County Road 405 laid a house that was mostly destroyed, not counting the interior walls. The remaining damage was limited to trees. Most of the damage from the Leaper EF3 was nothing to really write home about, until you got into Leaper itself. Homes off of the Black River were obliterated. Some were swept down to their foundations. Just across the river was a camper that was in an open camping spot. 2 people were in the camper when the twister hit. They both passed away. A mobile home just to the south of it was completely destroyed. The damage from the Club Hurricane EF3 was mostly relegated to tree damage, with the first instance of EF2 damage occurring off of State Highway 34. The next area of damage was off of Hidden Valley Road. A house had part of its roof missing. A camper nearby was destroyed, with 1 person inside who was killed. Trees nearby were snapped and power poles were broken. Several trees off of County Road 822 were snapped as well. The worst of the damage was off of State Highway DD, where a home was left without its exterior walls. According to the damage indicator on the damage assessment toolkit, vehicles were tossed 80 to 90 feet, and a 600-pound gun safe was tossed 100 feet. A side-by-side was thrown from the destroyed shop and landed on the roof of the home. The last area of significant damage from this tornado was off of County Road 830, a home missing most of its exterior walls. Damage from the 56 tornado began with downed trees in the rural forests. Then you got to 56 itself. The worst of the damage in town was to a cabin that was completely destroyed. The base of the cabin was lofted at least hundreds of yards away, and its remnants could no longer be identified. Trees off of Blanchard Road were mowed down by the tornado. A remote automatic weather station in the area recorded winds up to 151 miles per hour in this location. At this point, the NWS Service Assessment Team suggested that the tornado was massive at this point, with the idea the tornado was at least a half-mile wide or larger. The incredible tree damage continued as you went further northeast, as shown in this photo off of Highway 5. It wasn't until you got onto County Road 102 when the tornado's violent nature became obvious. A house was completely destroyed with an extensive debris field downwind. A car on the property was lofted, tumbled, and eventually thrown into a nearby pond. Just across County Road 15 nearby, a multi-level home was destroyed. A resident of the home took shelter in his basement and was unharmed. The main level floor structure was still attached to the foundation, and a small portion of a damaged rim joist on the foundation revealed properly spaced and secured anchor bolts. A two-door garage and a large covered porch were on the south side of the home, facing the winds of the storm motion, which likely contributed to the complete collapse of the structure. The next area of EF4 damage was on the intersection of South Main Street and County Road 49. Another home totally destroyed. Half of the 2x12 floor substructure was completely removed off of the foundation. The foundation sill plate was still attached to the half where the floor structure was destroyed, with secured anchor bolts present. All homes around the house were completely destroyed and took heavy debris strikes, and cars nearby were heavily damaged. A rung of an aluminum ladder was embedded in a large oak tree just west of the house, and the metal shop building just south of the home was completely destroyed as well. The two residents of the home were present during the tornado and were severely injured. They were transported to the hospital. The intensity of the damage tapered off for a while until you got near Highway 167, where the sidings of homes were ripped off, outbuildings were destroyed, a workshop was lifted off of its foundation and turned sideways, and hardwood trees were snapped. Homes off of Liberty Hill Road were also severely damaged. One house lacked the exterior walls, while the other house nearby was shifted off of its foundation. The next area of EF2 damage was found off of Highway 63. A house that wasn't secured to its foundation was blown away, and an outbuilding nearby was destroyed as well. Off of Highway 93, power poles were snapped and hardwood trees were uprooted. The last area of EF3 damage was observed nearby off of Highway 231 West, where a chicken house and a metal building system were destroyed, and the majority of a home next to them was heavily damaged. A garage next to the chicken house was slabbed entirely. As it went into Missouri, the damage was mostly relegated to trees and wooden poles. The tornado's damage was more extensive as you got to the end of its track, with homes missing walls and parts of their roofs. Damage from the Poplar Bluff tornado started off relatively minor, broken windows and some downed trees. The intensity of the damage quickly ramped up as it traveled along County Road 450. A cinder block foundation home with anchor bolts was completely destroyed, and the home right across the street was leveled as well. Just up the street were multiple duplex houses that had their outer walls and roofs gone. A garage building in the neighborhood nearby was also destroyed. Off of Midnight Road laid a trailer park. Multiple manufactured homes in the park were thrown into each other, and one was completely blown into the trees nearby. The church that trailer park residents took shelter in was also hit hard. Damage to the Poplar Bluff Kindergarten Center seemed to be limited to the roof. The damage got more widespread as you got to US Highway 60. Tall buildings had their roofs missing, power poles were snapped like toothpicks, and trees were uprooted. The last area of EF2 damage from the tornado was near the end of its path near Highway T. Trees were uprooted and homes were missing most of their roofs and some of their walls. Initial damage from the Cave City EF3 was minimal, and as soon as it crossed North Central Avenue to the southeast of Cushman, the damage quickly ramped up in intensity. Off of Claxton Loop laid what was left of a mobile home, a destroyed building, a split-level home that was destroyed where one fatality occurred, uprooted trees, and a double-wide mobile home that was rolled off of its foundation, over a deep ditch and then into the trees in the distance, where two were killed. Another mobile home nearby was destroyed and blown 50 yards away. Damage for the next bit of its track was relegated to trees. Then, it got into Cave City. A cell tower on the southwestern side of town was toppled. Off of West Center Street laid a mobile home that was completely gone. Homes that were shifted off of their foundations, and another home that was mostly destroyed by the twister bearing some interior walls. The significant damage continued as you went through downtown. Notably, a license plate was slammed into a snapped tree. A car shop off of Christopher Street destroyed and crumpled like it was nothing. Off of Misty Street, a home had its roof and carport blown away with some of the exterior walls blown down. The significant damage was also seen off of Dawn Street and Meadow Lane, which included a storage building that was completely destroyed, a tree where the entire treetop was removed, a house where half of the roof was ripped off, and a poorly constructed house that was mostly destroyed. The worst of the damage was off of Northwoods Lane, where a nearly finished house was completely destroyed with large vehicles tossed nearby. All but one corner of a storage facility nearby was destroyed. The next area of EF2 damage came off of West Prosperity Road, where a mobile home was destroyed alongside an outbuilding. And then nearby off of South Fairview Road was a home that was ravaged. Trees were snapped, and an outbuilding was totally destroyed. Off of Arkansas Highway 115, northeast of Calamine, a mobile home was destroyed with the debris blown away with it. At least 40 power poles along US Highway 67 North were broken, and off of County Road 112 laid more broken power poles, and notably over 6 grain bins that failed during the tornado, turned into scrap metal, or looking like they had been punched in. That was the last area of EF2 damage that was noted from the Cave City tornado. The rest of the damage was rated EF0 or EF1. The Diaz EF4 started out producing minor damage, with the worst of it being the power poles according to the Damage Assessment Toolkit. That was until it reached Highway 14W. Trees were annihilated, homes were leveled, including an office building that was built well and was attached to the bolted base plate. Off of County Road 14, 5 metal truss towers were damaged, including one that was completely knocked down. Near Jacksonport, an extensive amount of trees were snapped and uprooted near Highway 69 and Avenue Street, but the worst of the damage was off of West Main Street, where a large home was completely destroyed. Trees nearby, heavily damaged. The south side of a home next to it, gone. A metal building close by, swept clean entirely. Extensive tree damage persisted throughout the remaining path of the twister. But there were more tornadoes than what I covered. Tornadoes caused serious damage in places like Perryville, Missouri, Paragould, Arkansas, and in more locations. Following the storms, a state of emergency was declared in Missouri and Arkansas. The state of Arkansas requested federal aid, but it was denied by the Trump administration. Federal aid was later approved for both Missouri and Arkansas in May. Charities and citizens from around the nation pitched in to help, through the Salvation Army, Red Cross, and Operation Barbecue Relief. There isn't much regarding specifics because many areas that were hit were pretty rural, but there's one story I want to mention from the Bakersfield tornado. A local restaurant, Bootlegger's Barbecue, brought food to Bakersfield to feed workers and victims for free, while also holding a fundraiser, raising more than $11,000 selling pork butts and donating $3,700 each to Bakersfield, Rover, and Alton volunteer fire departments. Despite the destruction around them, people decided to stay and rebuild. So 1 year later, how are the hardest hit areas doing today? 1 year ago, at the time of uploading this video, one of the largest tornado outbreaks of 2025 took place in the United States. From March 13th through the 16th, 2025, a total of 118 twisters tore across the country. The most active day on the event was March 14th, where 53 twisters touched down in the states of Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Illinois. Over half of those tornadoes were rated EF2 or higher. The storms came in 2 rounds, the first firing along the cold front in the mid-afternoon in Kansas and Oklahoma, and spawning tornadoes in central Missouri, and then into the St. Louis metro area, and then into portions of Illinois. The second round of storms fired later in the afternoon, spawning EF3 and EF4 twisters in northern Arkansas and southern Missouri. The twisters on the 14th were responsible for at least 37 injuries and 13 deaths. As we are now at the 1 year anniversary at the time of uploading this video, how are the hardest hit areas doing today? For severe weather, the areas in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas didn't really get a break for a while. As from April 2nd through the 8th, severe storms and widespread flooding hit the region pretty hard. The St. Louis area was hit hard on May 16th, with an EF3 twister tearing through parts of the city. Thankfully, the St. Louis metro was spared from anything major severe weather-wise for the rest of the year after that. For many other areas, information is quite limited due to scarce reporting. But let's go over what happened in Poplar Bluff and Bakersfield, Missouri, and Cave City, Arkansas. A month following the Twisters, charities such as the World Central Kitchen were still in the area providing hot meals. Neighborhoods were tarping up their roofs and piling their debris into neat piles. Going into the summer, U.S. Senator Josh Hawley received a commitment from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem that they would speed up the decision-making process on Missouri's requests for federal aid. The town still needed volunteers and donations. But despite the damage, city manager Robert Naudel told Missouri Net that the town would still be open for business over the summer. On May 23rd, President Donald Trump declared a major disaster for southeastern Missouri for the storms that hit on March 14th through the 15th, and for the storms and flooding from March 30th through April 8th. Also in May, the Cost Plus food store announced that it would be reopening in Poplar Bluff in June. The Disaster Recovery Center closed up in June. Neighborhood recovery continued throughout the rest of the year, and come August, the kindergarten center would be open for students once more. Homes have been built, and storm spotters were honored for their life-saving efforts in August 2025. In Bakersfield, the volunteer fire department got a new fire truck as a gift from the Missouri Department of Conservation Equipment Center in Lebanon. In Cave City, help came from Nashville in May, with a benefit concert held there in the city for victims in Cave City. The Watermelon Festival was announced to be returning to Cave City in July, soon followed by Crystal River Cave Tours announcing that they would be back for business too. The hometown market held its grand reopening on December 8th. Despite the recovery efforts, things aren't the same. The issues with getting FEMA involved led to some towns and counties having to eat up the costs of disaster recovery, including communities that weren't too well off to begin with, even after FEMA came in. People were traumatized by the Twisters. The mental torture victims have likely gone through was enough to make anyone sympathetic for them. Not to mention that not everyone has been able to rebuild. Looking back 1 year later, many areas have made significant progress in rebuilding, but there's still a lot of work to do. The 2025 Pi Day outbreak made its legacy known to the victims across the states of Missouri, Arkansas, Illinois, and Mississippi. From the roaring winds of the Twisters to the destruction left behind, those in the mid and lower Mississippi valleys could never forget this outbreak. And it's a tornado outbreak that I will not forget anytime soon. Special thanks to my proofreaders, those being Convective Chronicles, Foxtrot, and Griff, Jai Collins and Cole Outlaw, John the Storm Guy, Kai Jackson, Nick Difiglia, and Ryan Scholl for letting me use their footage and photos from the event in this video, Aster for the tornado animation icons I use, Peter Corman for letting me use the radar loops he created, Celtic White for being the channel artist, Amberry for creating the VTuber model, Zinno, Crackalick, and Cyanide Blue for letting me use their music whenever I use it, and everyone for watching, it means a lot. Special thanks to those subscribed to the channel Patreon or are a YouTube member, those being Montpelier, Phoenix, and Queen Hyena at the Alfie's Army tier, Autostradamus, Michelle, Tanner, Tefu, Techno Idioto, and Worm Off the String at the Alf Jr. tier, Bipolar Batty, Brian Hawley, Dante DMC, David R, Esri, Foscrew, Foxtrot, Fry JC, Hannah Stormer, James Sullivan, Kara Kelly, King Shisa, Liz Swaff, Beans Machines, Rama, Tirani Rialta, and Van Granny at the Ulf Mini tier, and everyone listed at the Ulf Supporter tier. It means a lot. If you wish to support the channel financially, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member to get access to B-roll footage I've recorded, full interviews, and hopefully Patreon-exclusive documentary seminar-style videos in the future. Anyways, that's all I got. If you liked the video, consider subscribing to the channel, giving the video a like, commenting your thoughts, sharing it around, hyping the video, and all that jazz. Also, consider following me on Twitter and Twitch, and even joining my Discord server. Links to all of those is in the description. That being said, I'm Alferia, you all stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.